In the last episode, we talked about cognitive drag and the three systems that can drive your brain fog. If your fog is situational, showing up under pressure rather than all the time, you're dealing with a state. And this is the most common pattern in high achievers. Oxygen and glucose move away from your prefrontal cortex and towards circuits designed for survival and protection. This form of protection by your nervous system, it does come at a cost. When your system remains in a high alert state for a long time, clarity becomes metabolically expensive, even more expensive than it should be. It doesn't prioritize, nor does it care about focus. You lose access to all the privileges of short-term stress. So things like focus, increased motivation, drive, energy, all the positive things that kick in when you're in acute stress state. Welcome to the Wealthy Life podcast, the space where high performers rebuild the internal operating system behind their success. I'm your host, Deanna. Each week, we explore the nervous system, biology, identity, emotional patterns, and capacity that help you shift out of survival mode and into grounded, coherent, sustainable performance. Let's begin. Under prolonged stress, your brain makes a resource decision. Energy that would normally support things like creativity, strategy, those are redirected towards vigilance and defense. At the cellular level, mitochondria shift from growth mode to protective mode. This is known as a cell danger response. And in this state, innovation, creativity feels hard, not because you've lost it or you don't know how, but your system is prioritizing safety over growth. Think of it like a tree in a storm. Expanding the tree branches and growing leaves aren't the priority in the storm. It needs to dig deeper roots to survive the storm. In fact, it's actually a common practice. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, is to shake indoor grown trees and plants or use artificial force like a fan. Simulate environmental stressors like the wind, rain, or physical movement in nature. The purpose is to encourage stronger and more resilient growth. The process is based on, I'm going to butcher this term, thigmomorphogenesis. It causes the plants to develop thicker stems, stronger roots, and a more robust structure. But of course, when you shake it too much or too hard, it can damage the plant's structural integrity and stress it to the point of stunted growth and damaged roots. So this is the difference between acute stress and chronic stress in nature, in plants. Everything in moderation. And at the nervous system level, reduced ventral vagal tone limits social engagement and executive function. So that's why clarity comes back when you're feeling safe, but then disappears when you're under pressure again. We're going to talk a little bit about the prefrontal cortex because it is really important when it comes to advanced executive functioning and abilities to create, innovate, and expand your world. Under chronic stress, your brain makes a metabolic pivot, essentially. It's a resource allocation decision. Everything is about resource here. So under chronic stress, your brain is essentially wasting its highest order resources on background processes like scanning for threats. And this leads to what we mentioned earlier, the cell danger response. This was something that was discovered by Dr. Robert Navio. At the cellular level, your mitochondria adjust their priorities. Instead of producing energy for growth, creativity, integration, expansion, they move into a protective mode designed to conserve and stabilize. So in this state, clarity and innovation becomes biologically expensive. So when your cells are organized around defense, your system literally responds like you've been running from a lion for months. How do you talk about strategic business expansion when you're depleted, overwhelmed, irritable, and exhausted from running away from danger for months after months? The system has to feel safe and replenished before higher order processing and cognition comes back online. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the cell danger response. For a long time, we thought mitochondria simply as power plants for the cells. But we now understand they're also environmental sensors, constantly reading internal and external conditions. According to Dr. Navio, mitochondria operate in two primary modes: energy metabolism or cellular defense. When your nervous system perceives threat, whether that's a looming deadline, a difficult client, or even your own constant self-criticism, mitochondria adjust accordingly. Energy production is downgraded and cellular resources shift towards protection and stability. So from a performance and leadership perspective, your brain has access to less fuel. You might feel like, what's wrong with my body? Why can't I think? Why is my brain not working? There is nothing wrong. It's just your system has made a biological decision. In this state, your creativity, innovation, even your leadership skills, they're temporarily set aside because the system needs to work on safety, needs to reallocate resources to safety before it can reallocate resources back to growth. Now let's look at this from a polyvagal perspective. Polyvagal theory describes the social engagement system as the neural foundation that supports connection, nuance, and higher order decision making. The system is anchored in the ventrovagal complex. So when you're in what I call the anchor state, which is the goal for all of our clients, blood flow is well supported in the prefrontal cortex. And this is the region responsible for executive function, perspective, and integration, growth, creativity. So in this state, you gain access to one, pattern recognition, the ability to see several strategic moves ahead rather than reacting to what's immediately in front of you, playing 60 chess, so to speak. Two, emotional granularity, being able to lead difficult decisions with calmness, with precision, instead of reactivity. So when the nervous system shifts into a sympathetic high guard state, the body reorganizes its priorities. Blood flow, glucose, and oxygen are all redirected away from the prefrontal cortex towards circuits designed for rapid response and protection. So the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. But in this state, executive function becomes less accessible, like we talked about in the previous section, because the resources have been temporarily reassigned. Again, it's all about the resources here. I'm going to give you another perspective into this. Imagine your brain has finite processing capacity, the equivalent of 100 gigabytes of available memory. In a regulated state, most of that capacity is available for strategy, creativity, decision-making, innovation, everything we spoke about. In what I call the grip state, when you're gripping so tight and hanging on to everything, to control especially, that capacity actually gets redistributed. A significant portion is devoted to hypervigilance, tracking how you're perceived or anticipating potential threats, friction. Another portion is allocated to survival monitoring, running background calculations about cash flow, risk, uncertainty, rejection. And then another portion is consumed by management debt, correcting issues that came up when your brain was foggy, when clarity wasn't fully there, when you couldn't make a rational decision. And what's left, of course, is limited. So you might find yourself trying to scale a complex business with a fraction of your cognitive capacity available. A cognitive scientist, his name is Dr. John Sweller. His work on cognitive load theory shows that we all operate within a finite neurobudget. Again, resources. When extraneous load, the background noise of vigilance, high guard is reduced, germane load naturally increases. Now you're back. Your brain, your charm, your wits are back. Now you can make those strategic decisions again. And innovation, creativity becomes exciting again instead of a drag. The wealth method, the method that we use across all of our programs, is designed as a systemic audit of how your internal resources are being used. It helps close unnecessary background processes so your attention, energy, and your cognitive capacities, your intelligence, can be directed towards the decisions that actually move your business and your life and your decisions forward. Now, I want to go into a fourth category, a fourth perspective, if you will. We're going to get a little nerdy here. We're going to go through the perspective of quantum physics. In Reality Transurfing, if you haven't read the book, highly, highly recommend the book, is by Vadim Zeland. He introduces a principle called excess importance. At its core, it describes what happens when a goal becomes emotionally overweighted in the system. It doesn't have to be a goal, it can be anything in life. When an outcome is placed on a pedestal, the nervous system generates tension around it. That tension doesn't create clarity or momentum, as you would assume. It actually creates resistance. And Zealand refers to this as the action of equilibrium forces is a natural corrective response. Imagine a calm surface of water. When pressure or intensity is applied unevenly, the surface distorts. Physics naturally moves to restore balance. In practical terms, excess emotional charge around an outcome introduces instability into the system. The system then reorganizes to reduce that charge. And in business, of course, it looks like a prospect that ghosts you out of nowhere, a launch that encounters unexpected issues, things that feel harder than they should because there is tension in the system. And what Vadim Zealand calls importance in excess importance is not a mental construct. There's a biological background to it. You experience it as what I mentioned earlier, the grip, a tight jaw, shallow breath, a nervous system that's constantly under tension. In this state, your body is, of course, oriented towards protection. There's less social fluidity and creative range in this state. The ventral vagal system, as we spoke about in polyvagal theory earlier, the neural foundation of trust becomes less accessible. And this is a predictable physiological response to pressure. Now, you might think the solution is apathy or having to lower your standards or be less ambitious. So I can't be driven and constantly focused on how I want to build my business or my career. That's not it. The solution is actually neutrality. So through our wealth method protocols, the system learns to release excess charge without disengaging from your goals, your ambitions. The grip softens, your breath deepens, your body can relax, your nervous system feels safe again. It has nothing to do with your goals or how far you want to go in life. And this is what Vadim Zealand refers to as cool indifference. Not indifference to the outcome, but freedom from the tension around it. When your pressure lifts, your clarity comes back. Your resources are now reallocated. When your clarity comes back, of course, your action becomes more precise, more targeted. And when your system is regulated, your outcomes no longer need to be chased. They're now achieved through alignment, through responsiveness rather than reactivity, and through clear strategies. When you lead from the fog state, you quietly accumulate management debt. It often starts small, like an unclear email or a decision made without enough context, conversation that lands slightly off. that snap back at your team members can cascade into a 2-hour meeting, a frustrated team member, and eventually you having to step back to fix something that didn't need fixing in the first place. Now, 1 hour of dysregulated work turns into 5 hours of future repair work. When you operate from a state of ongoing survival brain fog, your growth becomes harder to sustain. And of course, this happens incrementally, like the frog in the boiling pot. There are 3 primary reasons for this. Decision-making lag. Tasks that should take minutes stretch into hours. Because of reduced cognitive efficiency, your management debt accumulates when the decisions are made when you didn't have your full executive function. 2, physiological incoherence. Research from the Heart Math Institute actually shows that when the heart and brain fall out of coherent rhythm, executive function is one of the first capacities to decline. Subtlety, emotional range, timing, they're all critical for high-level negotiation, and they all become harder to access. The third one, your innovation ceiling. When attention is absorbed by monitoring risk and uncertainty, your strategic vision narrows. It becomes difficult to see new opportunities, strategic decisions, long-range possibilities, because now your system is oriented towards immediate protection, short-term, very short-sighted, rather than exploration, innovation, creativity. In other words, the fog quietly sets a ceiling on how clearly you can think, you can scale your business, you can lead your team, you can innovate something completely new for the market. Now, in contrast to that, when your system receives consistent signals of safety, your internal operating system is properly supported, your cognitive capacity naturally comes back online. In this state, a few things happen. 1, neural efficiency. You are able to reclaim hours of focused work each day because mental effort is efficient again. You have your full attention back. You don't have to task switch all the time. Your energy is no longer spent on managing internal resistance, the internal struggles of resource allocation. 2, high resolution thinking. Pattern recognition sharpens. You're able to hold more variables at once and see connections that were previously drowned out by the noise. You're able to see the big picture and connect the dots. Strategy now becomes clear to you rather than more complex, trying to find the way in the fog. 3, emotional sovereignty. You're anchored when external conditions fluctuate, issues come up, problems come up, your team members come to you for solutions. So instead of being pulled into urgency or reactivity, you lead more from a regulated baseline because now you can actually hold yourself together under pressure. So this is actually the real advantage, having access to your full intelligence, aka your brain, when it matters the most. As Joe Dispenza says, you can't create a new future while living your past biology. If you keep trying to will your way through brain fog, you're just reinforcing the stress loop rather than breaking the stress loop. Clarity only comes back through physiological safety. When the nervous system begins to feel safe enough to stand down, several things naturally reorganize. 1, reducing neural leakage. Drawing on Rachel Kaplan's work, we use periods of soft fascination through environment and input that gently hold attention without demand, like staring out a window, looking at nature, being in nature, to give the prefrontal cortex space to recover and reintegrate. 2, rhythmic recovery. Instead of staying locked in high guard all the time or most of the day, your system learns how to move cleanly between effort and rest. These transitions are what allows your nervous system to return to the anchor state without urgency, without breaking down, without freaking out. 3, somatic clearing. As somatic research shows, unresolved survival energy doesn't disappear on its own. Through somatic processes, that residual charge can be safely discharged from the body, reducing the background tension that's accumulated through years of pushing. And 4, physiological coherence. Again, the research from HeartMath Institute shows that when the heart and brain move into coherent rhythm in alignment, executive function stabilizes even under pressure. Decision-making sharpens, emotional range widens, and the capacity to hold during moments that would previously overwhelm the system increases. So the goal here is to create the internal conditions where clarity, resilience, performance, creativity come back, and they remain available even in the middle of a crisis. Brain fog is rarely random. It's often your body's way of signaling that the system is over-leveraged. When your clarity depends on borrowed energy, I always talk about energy debt, your performance might be able to continue for a while, but the cost compounds in the background. It's like spending money in the front and not checking your bank balance or bank account. Over time, that drag shows up in your decision-making, focus, performance, creativity, leadership capacity. That's when the debt collector is coming to collect tax and debt. I hope after the last episode and this episode, you realize that it's not about the hacks, the tricks, the habits, or the optimization strategies. The root of everything you're struggling with is reducing the internal leakage that's pulling resources away from your highest order thinking, resource allocation. If this episode helps you understand why clarity disappears under pressure, the most important thing to remember is nothing you're experiencing is a personal limitation or you've lost something like your intelligence or your ability to do something. It's just a system response. So now the work isn't about what you know best, pushing harder or optimizing more, but to create the internal conditions where clarity, focus can stay with you even when the external pressure doesn't go away. If you want a practical place to begin, the 14-day Inner OS reset is available on a rolling basis. You can move through it on your own pace and use it to help your system experience what regulated clarity, focus, energy actually feel like. And for those of you who are ready to go a little bit further, the wealth rhythm is where this work becomes a way of living rather than something you revisit when things fall apart. It's a structure that helps your nervous system stay regulated while you lead, you build, you create, and you continue to make decisions in real life, in business, in relationships. You can find both options linked in the show notes. Start where it feels appropriate to you and allow your system to settle before you ask it to push and perform again. Thank you so much for being here. If this episode resonated, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's been carrying too much for too long. And if you're ready to rebuild your internal operating system, join me in the Wealthy Life community or explore my private coaching at deannawrose.com. Until next time, take a breath, trust your body, and stay curious. Let's build your wealthy life.